Hey, yo, what a div, y'all. Let's get right into it. I wanted to make a video today to talk about A, the changes that we're getting right this week that we got announced to us last night, but B, more importantly, it's just the importance of feedback and what our feedback is doing for the game, right? Which I said that in A, then B, but I'm going to talk about B first because I think it needs to be said. It's very important to say how important our feedback actually is. I see tons of people, giving out feedback, or tons of people, quote unquote, shutting down feedback. You're just saying, well, it's in early access, bro. It's in early access, bro. Look, the point of it being in early access is so that GGG can get our feedback before they release the full game, right? That's the point. If they didn't want our feedback, they wouldn't have given us early access to the game with it in a untested state so that they could fix it. They would have just said, suffer, wait till it's done, cope, seethe, mauled, right? Instead, we were given the opportunity to be here early, right? Because this is early access and a lot more early access than I think we are used to, right? This is truly early access in a state where we do need to be giving them feedback. So continue to give feedback because the feedback that we've given so far has led to one really good patch already. And, the upcoming patch also looks really good, right? Now, these patches are not going to fix everything, and it's going to take some time before they can iterate on everything, especially some of the more loot-driven issues, as we all know that loot is a Pandora's box of a sort that you can't just pop open at will because there is no putting that cat back in the bag once it's been freed. But with enough feedback, they can sort of kind of get an idea of if they can fix other problems related to the problem, right? And I want you to keep that in mind because it's going to come up as I talk about some of the other stuff later on. Now, I'm not going to cover every aspect of all the changes that we've gotten in detail, as some of it, quite frankly, does not need further explaining, but also because I don't have things to add to every change that occurred. And I trust you to use your eyes and read. This is not a news channel. This is a channel where I give like extra thoughts on things. So for details and things, you should read the stuff in the description so you can actually see what's getting changed if you care the details of the changes. But what I want to talk about first is the fact that we are getting more balance on supports and skill gems, specifically the fact that we are getting buffs, right? Because we've already seen our nerfs, right? We've seen a good bit of sweeping nerfs, and it's not to say that this patch is lacking in nerfs, right? They included the tornado and vine arrow nerfs in here. Like, we are going to be taking care of those skills, right? Unfortunate. But more important is that there's a number of skills in the game that really do need buffs. A number of things, even just in the two characters I've messed around with so far, that I felt were overwhelmingly underperforming. 3, if I count the witch that I just have like on the side that nobody really knew about until I just mentioned her now, right? We've tested a number of skills here already that I felt like did not feel great. Friends of mine, probably you guys, the community at large, has come up with the idea that a couple of these skills just don't feel very good. And so it's very nice to see that we are getting buffs to those skills. And far more important to me is support gems. I'm hoping to see that the penalty lessening on support gems actually does properly widen the number of usable supports on specifically our main damage skills, right? Like, you can get away with some of the damage penalty ones on utility skills, except for things where you need the damage from that utility skill to trigger something such as like a shock or an ignite, whatever it may be. But I'm hoping that these do work out a little bit better for us, as well as I see that they added 2 supports, and this is exciting. I want more. It's probably my number one point of feedback right now with the skill system has been that we need more supports because there's just a number of skills in the game. If you're familiar with my Chiola Monk, for example, my chonk, if you will, you've definitely looked at Into the Breach and realized, wait a second, I literally could support this with every viable support in the game for it at the moment when I get it 6 linked, because there are just that few supports that work on it. And so I'm hoping that, this is a thing that is rolled out rather steadily or potentially in mass, but just keeping that as a high priority, right? That's just one of my pieces of feedback, is that I would like to see more supports because I need options, that's supposed to be the appeal of this system, is that you get to have all of these different, more interesting supports on all of your skills. So I want to see that like lived up to, if you will. Next up, I want to talk about the Trial of Sigma change, because I think this is probably the most important thing actually in here for most players. This is not personally the most important thing outside of the bug fix that got mentioned in here, because I knew something was wrong with a specific attack in the game and I couldn't put exactly my thumb on how wrong it was, but I had a good feeling about it. If you were not aware, damage over time was doing a ton of damage to your honor, right? And it was pretty easy to identify that damage over time was the problem, but it was interesting to see just how bad it actually was. But you would, take poison damage, for example, and then your honor would just annihilate itself, even if you yourself, the character, took no damage, which it's worth noting, by the way, at 0 honor resistance, your honor loss should be equivalent to the amount of damage you take. So if you have honor resistance, you should be losing less honor than you are taking damage. And if you aren't really taking damage from something, you should not have been seeing the amount of honor you were losing from poison, ignite, or especially this flamethrower attack on this one mob type that like puts down a little like sensor and then breathes fire out of it. That attack is also coded as damage over time, and it explains a lot as to why it was able to do 3 times as much honor damage and then basically have a third of its damage ignore your honor res. That explains a lot in there. There's also some stuff in here that they talked about with honor damage now scaling down based on distance to enemies. And honestly, why was this not already in the game? And before you go, oh, it's early access, bro, it's early access. No, this was in PoE 1's Sanctum, the mechanic that this is based off of, where they explicitly nerfed down honor damage if you were in melee distance, or resolve damage back then, if you were in melee distance of the enemy. This was already in the game. Why they thought that wasn't needed a second time is beyond me, right? I knew it wasn't there, but I wasn't really willing to raise a pitch over it, because I think there's actually a bigger problem with this trial at the moment, and it's honor resistance. I mentioned it earlier, and it's something that you are really grateful for the existence of when you are getting your initial 3 ascendancies, right? When you are trying, especially like, if you fail the first or the first one a couple of times, or maybe you decide that you hate Trial of Chaos, and you want to go through Trial of Sigma to get your second ascendancy point as well, having the relics for honor res and getting like a good bit of honor res early actually helps you a lot in the subsequent runs. That is a big deal in case you are failing. And that's a great tip if you're currently still struggling with that. Get some honor res for your first or second trial. It makes it so much easier. The third trial, the effective honor res is still pretty good, but there's also a lot of damage over time in that zone. So after this change, third zone should actually be fine as well. It's the 4th floor in which you realize that your honor resistance means shit. And I really do mean it means shit. The thing about resistances, right? One of the reasons that I am so adamantly against the resistance stat existing is actually the implication of balance that it has, which PoE 2 has done a better job with it overall, but it does end up at a point where you are expected to have this resistance capped, right? 75% resistance is taking 1/4 of the damage, which means that the balanced number, let's say that the attack is intended to do 2,000 damage, it needs to be coded to do 8,000. This is wonderful that you can mitigate it down this far, but it also becomes a requirement for tuning purposes, right? You now have to assume that people have 75% resistances. So any small amount of resistance up or down from that point, and it's a massive difference in how much damage is dealt. This is why I am a big fan of, say, like how Last Epoch does resistances, where you actually balance out to a state of net 0 all the time in endgame. And the reason I'm pointing this out as a problem is because the 4th floor of Trial of Sigma is balanced around that 75% honor res. Very obviously. Like if you do not have honor resistance and you are not actually good at Sanctum / Trial of Sigma, and you don't have the right build for this type of content, the right power level, the right amount of reach, etc., you are going to take so much honor damage if you do not have capped honor resistance. And even at capped honor resistance, it does not feel like you are mitigating resolve damage. It feels like you are making the game playable, just like actual resistances. And I don't like that. It's just a design problem they managed to put in another place, as opposed to, I was hoping that they would have maybe looked around and realized, especially since they got it to a decent point in the state of mapping right now in PoE at the end game. I was really hoping they were going to learn that lesson instead of making it happen again. That's probably my biggest piece of critique about the trial at the moment, though. These changes are fantastic. I just wanted to like put this on your mind about like, the way that this is still problematic, and get it in your head that when you do go for that fourth fight, you will need honor resistance. It's also worth noting that fight is actually pretty hard if you don't have mobility. I will not spoil the fight for you here. If you haven't seen it, you want to go in blind, that's all be wonderful. One tip: get a weapon swap for blink prepared. Don't ask me why, just trust me. Right? And now the last section of this patch, or this announcement rather, not even this patch, is endgame and item balancing, which this is probably the part of the game that I have the most opinions on at the moment. If you've seen my crafting video, you'll understand what I mean there. But I have a lot of opinions on how I feel about endgame right now, especially in the sense that I was literally so done with endgame, I rolled a new character. And it's worth noting, these changes do not actually fix the entirety of the reason that I rolled characters instead of playing in the endgame, but I want to play around with some of these changes before I make a video talking in detail about the things that I don't like about endgame at the moment, because again, it is obviously a thing that is like, it's very, very obvious to me when they say, yeah, we made this endgame in the past couple of months. It is super obvious, not in how bare bones it is, but in how untested it is, right? How unrefined it is compared to the multiple years of refinement that has gone into the campaign. It's just night and day difference. And so I want to see how this next iteration of changes goes so that I can give some more feedback on guiding towards the next iteration of the end game, right? But these changes are pretty good. They start to address my core problem with endgame, which I will give you here, because I imagine if you are in mapping, you're already feeling this as well, which is death is permanent, right? Permanent, air quotes, right? You don't lose your character, but you lose that map. You lose any benefits that map had as well, right? If that map was a Delhi Breach irradiated map boss node and you died because of some fuck shit, nice Delhi Breach irradiated and map boss node, and your waystone is gone. Like, you lose so much to dying in a map that it feels really bad when your deaths are not what we'll consider a fair death, right? Your definition of a fair death depends on the person that you are, but there's generally been a decent consensus that if nothing else, you should be able to identify the thing that's going to kill you, right? So in that vein, the things that they've like hit are a couple things that are out of band numbers wise, and a couple things that are hard to actually like see. Hard to see being volatile crystals and volatile plants, like the purple little volatiles that follow you. Those being removed, volatile crystals, and the nerf to volatile plants, wonderful. The acknowledgement that volatile plants is pretty difficult to actually see and therefore should not be doing that much damage. Like, for comparison purposes, the lightning mirage is actually in a really good spot. And it's crazy to think that me as a PoE 1 player just said that lightning mirages are in a good spot relatively, because I can actually see them really obviously, and they still nuke me, but I know they're going to happen. That's a good thing. We should be able to know and react to the thing that's going to kill us if it's intended to kill us. So glad they're making changes in that regard, as well as then looking at things like the chaos damage that's dealt in the end game was egregious. Crit damage on monsters, this is an interesting one. I'm okay with this just because I don't like monster crits personally, but hey, is what it is. Either way, that's less random ways to fall over and die. Maybe I won't have that one clip that ended the stream of mine where I like spawned into a map, a charger came in as I'm like coming out of immunity phase and slams down right next to me. Like, as in like I'm ending my immunity. I'm like deciding to get ready to move and it's just one shot through crit, like on a crit. It was brutal. I was so tilted when it happened, right? So maybe that reduces that possibility from happening. Who knows? We'll see. Now we can get into some things about design that I actually have more opinions on, because I think these changes are good. But the one that I'm more fixated on actually is the res change that they mentioned here. And I think this is a very good way to solve two problems simultaneously. One, this is a question for you, the viewer, right? Did you know there was a res penalty in maps? Because maybe I'm just flat out stupid, but I didn't know about the res penalty until a couple hours before this post was posted. I was just chatting in Discord and somebody mentioned it, and I was like, oh my God, wait, is that why my resistances have felt so off between hideout and maps? That makes so much sense. How was I supposed, or like when you think that you've been capped and then suddenly you uncap and you're like, huh? So if you didn't know, there was a penalty that was tucked away in the like info tab at the top left, which I read most of those things. I just didn't read the map node one because I didn't think there was going to be critical information like that in the map node. Luckily it's gone. So that solves one of my problems, which is which is literally just the conveyance of information. And two, the other problem that I think will be solved a lot by this is actually crafting pressures. Like your gearing pressure gets a lot easier when you no longer need an additional 60 revs across your character. It will allow you to be a little bit more lenient with lower tier rolls on resistances. It'll allow you to flat out remove resistance rolls or resistance runes from gear. It's unfortunate we can't read rune gear because now I'm sitting here thinking about the gear pieces that I would love to take a rune or two out of because they are runed with this resistance in mind. I would love to, make that adjustment. Can't do it. That sucks. But at least I can now go craft something new with the knowledge that it doesn't have to have like double or triple resistances because this is no longer a thing, which will in effect make crafting at least feel a little bit better because it's one less stat that you have to have, especially in a state where suffixes are very overloaded in terms of pressure with how high attribute requirements are and how stringent we were with our need for resistance. It's both elemental and then chaos, which the need for chaos res also just got reduced by the reduced amount of like scaling on damage for chaos damage, which we have to test this, right? This could be a load of malarkey, but per the wording here, it seems like it'll actually make a big difference. The last thing here to talk about, since we're still in the endgame and item section, is the chart and belt, the belt changes. There's some other stuff in this section that I'm not really going to touch. Like it's in the character and item balance section on the page, but the main thing I'm going to talk about is actually the charm modifier on belts, because this has been a full-time complaint of everybody I've played with since it happened. And by full-time I complain, I mean just more the idea that we all acknowledged really quickly that +1 or +2 charm slots is not a thing. And so we just said, well, all right, I guess you get one charm. C'est la vie is what it is. And then we just suffered through swapping out the charm that we need based on the content. You're like, man, this map is stunning me a lot. Let me put in a stun charm. This map is freezing me a lot. Let me put in a freeze charm. And it doesn't feel good, but we don't have the access to the solution that we were told was in the game. And so now that we are being given access to the solution that is in the game more readily, supposedly, right? The, +1 being at level 23 and +2 being at level 64 and onwards means that you should actually be able to get a belt with +1 or +2 charm slots relatively easily, and therefore can use it to shore up resident panic, or use it to get your immunity to various ailments or afflictions, or maybe you just want the golden charm for some rarity, who knows? But maybe we'll actually be able to use the charm slot, and I think that is wonderful. That great change. Not to wind this down, I got to give you guys a couple things that I have my eyes on as far as things that I want to see change going forward, specifically just because, we're in the business of giving a little bit of feedback, and I might do some more detailed quantitative analysis on this topic in particular. But the next thing that I want looked at is mana. I think mana in the state of PoE right now is egregious. It's probably the second largest thing that's bothering me about the game right now. Number one being, of course, just overall a lot of thoughts about endgame and endgame fairness. But as I said earlier, don't want to get into in detail about that until after I've played with the new change to see if it fixes the problems that I had previously, or if it starts to just begin to pare back a little bit of the frustrations around that problem. Not sure which one that will be, but I'd rather get a little bit into mana, which, just to give a little bit of the thought now, it's specifically that it feels like I'm paying way too much mana whenever my skills go up in levels. And I struggle to believe that those mana costs are balanced properly around mana pools. They almost feel like they're balanced in fear of what a character with real mana would do, and forgot how many characters wouldn't want to have that type of mana, right? Because even as a quarterstaff user, where I have, a reasonable amount of it for my skill gems, as I believe I need like 104 or 109 even for my like hybrid skill gems that I run. I find it difficult to have enough mana to justify, say, a level 17 curse, for example, right? Like the mana cost on that is just high. And adding levels definitely makes it even worse to things when I look at how the mana cost on like Tempest Flurry for me completely skyrockets anytime I consider a piece of gear with plus levels on it. Rip that one staff I had that gave me a bunch of levels, but annihilated my mana cost, right? Forced me into inspiration, which I still haven't taken off since then because mana costs are just so high anyways. And maybe thinking, well, that's going to give you inspiration a use case, sure, but that's one skill that can be supported by inspiration. And our builds usually are going to have like 2 to 3 skills that we press in them, right? And maybe it's to give more credence to mana rolls, but then that kind of falls into the sphere of my problems with crafting, right? I only have X amount of passive points. I can't be dedicating them to mana, or I'm not in a position on the tree that can spec into mana nuts. So then I have to get it through int, which is pretty hard to get because I need the other stats for the rest of my requirements on the character. Or it's supposed to be, get into mana on gear, which I can't really control that at all to solve that problem. It somewhere in there feels like a problem that I'm supposed to be solving and not actually being able to solve. And I think the easiest way for me personally, I feel like it should come down, but that's bad feedback, right? But ending up this video, I needed to give a piece of bad feedback to understand to show you guys the difference, right? Talking about how I feel about mana and feeling like it's just not worth the increased mana cost, what I'm getting is the point, right? Maybe it's supposed to be that they do like the design of mana being that expensive and they need to make the payoff bigger for us, right? Maybe there's just another avenue by which we can scale some of these things that have these ridiculous mana costs to make it worthwhile to us to pay that level of mana for it. Or maybe it is that the mana costs are too high, or maybe it is that the access to mana is too poor, or mana regen, mana leech, etc. is all too poor. Who knows, right? That's for them, the designers, to figure out. Get me, a non-designer, well, for PoE, I am a game designer for other games, but I'm not a designer for PoE or PoE 2. Therefore, me giving them the solutions that I would use is not the answer. Not unsolicited. Good feedback is me telling them, hey, I feel like I'm not getting enough for that mana. Do something with that. And so I implore you guys to continue giving good feedback, because the community has been giving good feedback by and large about the game. And good Lord, does the game need it. Not because the game is bad. The game is beautiful, wonderful. I would not have over 150 hours in this game already if I didn't think it was beautiful and wonderful. But it needs feedback to continue growing so that it can, eventually just dwarf every other game on the planet. I'm joking a little bit, but you get the idea, right? The more feedback that we give, they're able to take action upon after properly analyzing it and, making changes that align with our best interests, between us as players and the design of the game, and making sure we don't accidentally ask for things that we don't want. We will end up with a fantastic game in the end. That's what the point of this early access period is. So to that end, and to wrap up this video, leave some of your thoughts about things that you feel like need to be changed, things that we can all keep our eye on together, things that, you want to know my opinions on. Also, you can drop those in the comments. Just curious to know what you guys have to say. Or if you want to have these conversations live instead of, through a comment section that might take me a day to reply through, just because I've been kind of swamped between everything going on these past 2 weeks, you can catch me on Twitch or my Discord. Those links are in the description. You know how to find them. Anyways, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.